Just getting diagnosed cut my life expectancy by more than a decade, so I started running, and what happened next changed everything. You see, society tries to fix mental health issues for a struggling medical system. There's another way, through physical exercise, that taps into the primal nature of our bodies to help better regulate our mental health. I'll show you the 6 steps I took to improve your mental health and well-being. And how do I know all this? Well, I have schizoaffective disorder. It's basically a mix of schizophrenia and bipolar. Yep, ouch. Magic sponge ain't gonna do nothing for that one.
You got what, son?
So this approach works for me, it should definitely work for you. First step, you need to avoid this crucial mistake that everyone makes. You see, when you get a diagnosis, it kind of goes one of 2 ways. You either have a crisis of sorts where things are taken out of your hands and you get given a diagnosis whether you like it or not. That's what happened to me. Or you feel like something isn't right and you spend a lot of time struggling with the NHS or another system to get medical support. For the second sort, there's a moment of recognition of the struggles you've been through and a feeling of validation and better understanding of oneself. But once all that subsides, you're going to be left thinking, now what? Because just as Shakespeare said, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet, I say, an undiagnosed schizo is just as likely as a clinically diagnosed one to chuck out the family router because he thought it was stealing his thoughts. Yeah, that probably doesn't roll off the tongue in the same way, but I did that. The point is, that diagnosis of a condition isn't really the silver bullet that many anticipate it to be. You are who you are to a certain extent. And if you continue to live in the same way that you have been up until that point, then having a diagnosis or not isn't going to make a huge difference to your outcome. Now in the movies, your journey would end here, tied up with a neat little bow. The doctor would give you some therapy and medication and it would all work wonders. But I'm going to let you in on a secret most don't realise. We know some risk factors for mental illness, like how it can run in families. It does in mine. But beyond that, there's still no real medical consensus on what physically causes mental illnesses, if anything even does. And because we don't fully understand what causes it, we don't fully understand how to treat it either. In a strange way, mental illness is a bit like having a slightly unhinged, passive-aggressive partner. Instead of just telling you, like a grown adult, that they're annoyed that you ate the last of the chocolate in the fridge, they give you the silent treatment and insist they are fine. And now, your whole life becomes a dull, nightmarish episode of Columbo, as you try to figure out what you did wrong. Or so I've heard. Even doctors will openly admit this uncertainty. When you're prescribed medication, they'll often say they think it affects certain areas of the brain. They can track improvements in some symptoms and not others, but usually can't tell you exactly how it works. I remember this time being on an antipsychotic called quetiapine. One strange thing I noticed was that my pet allergies, they suddenly disappeared. Later, I found out why. Some research showed the medication blocks histamine receptors, basically the same thing allergy tablets do for hay fever. A lot of psychiatric medication works like this. You're essentially turning parts of the brain on and off and seeing what helps. Which is why there's so much trial and error in finding the right medication. That trial and error hit me pretty hard. One time I went to see a consultant because I wanted to change a specific medication. I explained how sleepy and distant it made me feel. I was falling behind at work, sometimes I'd even doze off at my desk. I was genuinely worried I'd lose my job. I hoped switching meds might be less disruptive. Consultant shrugged, suggested I look for a less demanding job. As if that was any kind of solution. When I tried to explain again how serious the problem was, he looked at me and he said something I'll never forget.
Well, you must take this, if not for you, then for the people around you.
In almost every other area of medicine, you're treated for your benefit. But with mental health, you're often treated first for the comfort and safety of others. And your needs come second. And on that note, I always remember the Alice in Wonderland printouts on the wall. I used to stare at them, wondering whether they were just horribly misjudged but well-meaning artwork, or an absolutely elite prank by some overworked, underpaid NHS staff member that you almost had to admire, even if it was at your expense.
How do you know I'm mad?
You must be, or you wouldn't have come here.
We're behind. There's been a relative lack of serious research into mental illness throughout history, which means this whole field still lags after most other areas of medicine. And that's not an accident. For a long time, people with mental illness were so marginalised and demonised that they simply weren't seen as worth helping. To put that into perspective, London's oldest hospital, St Bartholomew's, was built in 1123, but more than 500 years later, in the same city, people with mental illness were still being held at Bethlehem Asylum, better known as Bedlam, where the public would literally go and gawk at patients for entertainment, like some kind of crazy zoo. That's just how far behind we are. Now I want to be really clear with something here. I'm not advising anyone not to start taking medication, and we're not telling anyone to come off meds they are already on. At times, medication has worked very well for me, especially during the acute stages of illness. I probably owe my life to lithium. All I'm doing is pointing out the reality. We're still working with limited funding, limited research, and imperfect tools, and sometimes we have to make do with what we got. But the next step for me, it was a breakthrough. I realised there's one thing we actually do know about what causes mental health problems. Human beings are essentially modern software running on ancient hardware. Serious, it's like we're trying to run Cyberpunk on your nan's trouser press. At a basic level, our goal is survival, self-preservation. Everything in our bodies is built to keep us alive. A lot of this happens through what's known as the autonomic nervous system. It keeps you breathing while you're asleep instead of letting you suffocate. Its two main parts, the parasympathetic and sympathetic systems, work in opposite ways but in tandem. One conserves energy and keeps you at rest, the other primes you to act when you need to. And this really shines through when our survival is threatened. For early humans, this meant predators. Big, scary, sharp-toothed predators that could eat you in seconds. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wouldn't want to bump into a saber-toothed tiger in a dark alley.
Oh, hi there.
That's the kind of threats our bodies, our ancient hardware, evolved to handle. So if in the wild that tiger sized you up as a potential snack, wondering what would make the perfect condiment for your severed arm,
Why not both?
your body would respond with a full-on fight-or-flight reaction.
In a moment of crisis, the amygdala fires and the sympathetic nervous system springs into action. It detects danger and unleashes a cocktail of hormones for survival. Heart rate skyrockets, blood is diverted to muscles, and physical performance spikes. And so, for a moment, we become our primal selves again, a mix of brawn and brains that shape the planet.
Very handy when something's trying to rip your face off. Less useful when you get location blocked from your mum's Netflix account. Or when that person you like leaves your message unread all day. Or your landlord raises the rent. Again, fight or flight gets triggered every time based on the perceived threat rather than the actual threat. And those rush of chemicals and physical responses cause feelings that we would call anxiety. But it doesn't help us when we're trying to deal with the complexities of the modern world. You know, whilst it's true the threat of an economic recession might be as serious as stumbling into a bear in the woods. The case remains, you can't have a fist fight with high interest rates, or foot race with reduced consumer confidence.
Can I send you my CV?
Sometimes, when fight or flight isn't enough, the parasympathetic system kicks in. We freeze. Think back to our bear example. Explorers are told, if it's brown, lay down. If it's black, fight back. If it's white, good night. Aggressively confronting a black bear might scare it off. Freezing in front of a grizzly could signal that you're no threat to its cubs. The freeze response, like fight or flight, was useful once. Nowadays, the freeze response often shows up as what we would call depression. And if it's white, good night, I hear you ask? Well, that's because if you see a polar bear, no matter how you respond, you're screwed. This hardware, our body, was built 7 million years ago when hominins split from apes. Has it changed much? Even though the world around it has. Its digital body parts remind us of our past. The tailbone that we have, or a tail we no longer have. Ear muscles that used to funnel sound like a dog's. Next time you're at a party, see if you or your friends can wiggle your ears. We used to be able to funnel them to detect danger. We lost that ability about 25 million years ago. I'd leave out the bit about some geezer on YouTube and a neon balaclava telling you to do it, mind. Unless you want your party to turn into an intervention, that is. Anyway, the point is, this hardware still exists. It can adapt, but change comes slowly. Evolution doesn't rush. And this is the key takeaway. If we can't change the body parts that aren't helpful anymore, and we also can't stop the body reacting in ways that aren't helpful anymore, well, then all that's left to do is to try and channel our natural responses into ways that are helpful.
We should connect on LinkedIn.
And this is the one thing you can do to reclaim those natural responses. You see, when I run, it's the only time I feel free. Somehow, I feel at one with my body, fully aware of every inch, of every sinew straining and pulsing, yet weightless, almost ethereal. My focus locks in. I'm hyper-aware of my surroundings, other people on the streets, cyclists, cars, every obstacle I need to avoid. The raspy sound of my breathing, the heavy throb of blood in my ears as my heart pounds. My mind becomes quiet. All distractions, all worries, all negative thoughts. They just pause. All I can think about is what's ahead, where I need to get to. My purpose is simple. Get from A to B. And in that space between A and B, nothing else exists. I don't exist. Before I put my phone down and take the first step out the door, all my troubles, my responsibilities, they're there, they're waiting for me. And when I reach my destination, life will still be there, waiting for me. But during the run, it's all on hold. I'm not contactable, I'm not locatable, I'm nowhere. Think about it. How often in life do you get that kind of inner peace? The clarity that comes from knowing exactly what you're meant to be doing in that exact moment. And this is what I learned. A consistent running routine regulates your inner energy. It smooths out the restless highs and the bleakest lows. Running fulfills a primal, physical need, one our ancient hardware actually understands. Now, when you get that Teams message from your boss, late at night, asking if you have time for a quick chat in the morning, you don't spend the night tossing and turning, anxious, overthinking. Instead, you channel that fight, flight, or freeze response in a physical, tangible way by going for a run. You trick your central nervous system. It thinks you're responding to a real threat, an apex predator in the wild, and if adrenaline hits, perfect. It makes you go faster, burn it out, and afterwards, you can finally relax. If you're more prone to the freeze response, depression, staying active in a structured way helps override it. It triggers other responses in the fight, flight, freeze bracket, stopping the freeze from settling in.
This is gonna create a lot of paperwork for HR.
Now at this point, you might be thinking, look, I've tried exercise routines before and I just can't stick at them. I was the same, but this one trick, it really worked for me. People always talked about the runner's high, and I thought it was a myth. Or if it wasn't something that I got. They'd say it's a chemical release. And sure, endocannabinoids are produced in exercise and give a general sense of well-being. But I think the true runner's high comes from more than just chemicals. It's a combination of the primal, physical elements we've talked about, and the conscious, meditative focus of the run. So now when people tell me they don't run because they don't enjoy it, or they don't get that runner's high, shh! I say to them, just give it time. It's not a one-off thing. You won't feel as giddy as a teenager who's just unlocked their parents' liquor cabinet after one jog. The effects build gradually, and as your body adapts, it gets easier, it gets more enjoyable. Running sculpts you physically, it makes you more efficient, and the more efficient you get, the more fun it becomes. That's why my golden rule is this. Remove every obstacle possible between yourself and participation. Tear down every barrier of entry. You don't need a minimum distance to cover. You don't need other people to run with. You don't need expensive shoes. You don't need any skin-tight clothing that may or may not show your barely concealed genitalia. Although if that's your thing, how about it? Anyway, you just need to put one foot in front of the other. Everything else can come later. But first, you must run. So like this video and subscribe to the channel because I'm going to provide loads more content showing you how to do just that in the future. And when I say tear down every barrier to entry, that includes you. Don't let yourself become a barrier to entry. Don't get in your own way. When you do make the effort to run, treat yourself like some bigwig at work. Under-promise and over-deliver all the way. Kiss your own arse. It's never, oh, I only managed to make it to the end of my road. It's, I ran further today than I have for years. I'm a goddamn rock star. Talk yourself up, because there will always be people out there happy to talk you down. And when I started doing that, well, the results, they just blew me away. Let me explain. I like to think of my mental illness like the ocean. Sometimes the waters are calm, the sun is shining, and you're sailing along, there's the birds chirping, and you're having a lovely little time. Other points, the waters are rough. You're in the eye of a storm and getting capsized. Running is a bit like a life jacket. It can't stop me from getting shipwrecked in the choppy tide, but it keeps me from getting dragged under and drowning. As a runner, I've gone from being a chain smoker who could barely get out of bed, to running some of the biggest marathons in the world and losing half my body weight in the process. Don't get me wrong, I'm never going to give Eliud Kipchoge any problems, but Harry Styles? I'd leave him in my dust. And while he's universally adored and fabulously rich and more successful than me in any measurable way, we all know that's what really counts, right? Of course, I'm only joking. It doesn't matter how far or fast you run. What matters is that you show up for yourself, that you do run. By doing this, I've got things into a manageable state. I've got a family I adore, a job I love, a very normal, deeply boring adult life. No, seriously, I've never been happier, and that's why I'm wearing this mask. It's not a fetish or anything. Society's come a long way, but there's still a lot of stigma. I need to protect all that I have. I started this video by saying that, statistically, my illness meant I might die younger. But it doesn't have to be that way. We can endure, together. Those of us with mental health issues, no matter the diagnosis, no matter the severity, we're fighting every single day. And that is real bravery. So no matter what society says, don't think of yourself as a problem, or weak, or defective. Against the odds, I'm still here. And you're still here. We're doing alright.